The palace found out about this decision through formal paperwork, rather than a dramatic public announcement. The updated guest list for the Sovereign Parade was distributed to senior royal officials, and Queen Camilla's name simply was not on it anymore. Her name was not moved to a secondary position, shifted to arrive in a separate carriage, or assigned to a less prominent seat in the royal grandstand. It was completely erased from the roster. When Camilla received the finalized document in her hands, her immediate response was not an angry outburst in front of palace staff or an emotional confrontation. It was complete, heavy silence. She looked at the paper once, scanned down the formal arrangement where her designated place had always been established, and found nothing. That kind of quiet in a royal household is louder than any explosive argument, because everyone in the room instantly understood the immense weight of what they were witnessing before a single word was spoken out loud. King Charles was standing near a window in his private quarters when the reality of the situation landed. Those close to him noted that he had the look of a monarch who knew disastrous news had arrived before anyone even possessed the nerve to state it directly. He understood immediately that this guest list was not casual paperwork that a junior secretary in the planning office had mistakenly printed. Princess and does not make careless clerical amendments. She does not act on emotional impulse or personal whim, having operated within the rigid machinery of the monarchy for over 7 decades, and knows precisely what every single ceremonial gesture and seating arrangement communicates to the world. When her office authorized a revision that removed the Queen Consort from a premier military event, Charles knew this was not a simple mistake that could be smoothed over with a quick phone call. It was calculated, deliberate, and final. The clean execution left no room for temporary adjustments or backroom negotiation. The Sovereign's Parade represents one of those sacred military traditions where royal presence signals authority, continuity, and institutional discipline. Every individual positioned near the center of the ceremony helps shape the message of who holds legitimate power and trust within the monarchy. Therefore, when Camilla's name disappeared, it was far more than a personal snub within the family circle. It was an unmistakable public statement regarding her actual standing within the royal hierarchy. The senior courtier who delivered the confirmation did not attempt to soften the reality. There were no polite excuses offered regarding sudden fatigue, conflicting calendar commitments, or desire for a smaller official party. The order came directly from Princess N. When Charles asked if the final version of the list could be re-examined, the question hung uselessly in the air. Nobody rushed to offer reassurance because everyone knew the truth. Anne's authority had moved through official channels with absolute precision. The most alarming detail for Camilla was not just the removal itself, but the permanent tone embedded in the paperwork. It stood as a direct correction to the royal line of precedence for the event. Camilla finally set the document down, and those present reported that the surrounding silence felt almost unbearable. Charles found himself caught between his role as a devoted husband who wanted to defend his wife, and his duty as a monarch who recognized that Anne's grip on ceremonial protocol could not be overruled without severe institutional consequences. To fully grasp why Princess Anne took such an uncompromising stance, one must look at the events preceding the guest list revision. Every palace rift has a backstory, and this conflict began behind closed doors during a rehearsal briefing. Camilla had sought to expand her ceremonial role beyond what was traditionally allotted. During the briefing, Charles expected a routine discussion covering timing and security. However, the atmosphere shifted dramatically when Camilla pressed for her position alongside the king to be visually reinforced in a more prominent fashion. Having spent decades enduring public scrutiny and comparison, Camilla felt a natural desire to solidify her standing as queen consort. Yet, the more she insisted on reshaping the protocol, the more Princess Anne withdrew into an intense, rigid silence. When Anne finally set her pen down onto the table, the entire room fell still. She addressed Camilla directly, stating in no uncertain terms that a state military parade is not a platform for personal validation, and that sacred protocol cannot be bent to soothe private insecurities. The choice of words was blunt and devastating. By labeling the request as an expression of private insecurity, and transformed procedural debate into a stark judgment of character, she made it clear that using a historical military tradition to elevate personal prestige was entirely unacceptable. Charles looked between his sister and his wife, paralyzed by conflicting loyalties. when Camilla suggested that Anne's strict interpretation was needlessly harsh, and simply closed her official folder without offering a single word of compromise. Days later, that very same folder circulated through palace offices with Camilla's name officially removed. The confrontation soon spilled into the private corridors of the palace. Camilla confronted Anne directly with the amended document in hand, demanding to know if public humiliation had now become official palace policy. Those words carried the raw frustration of someone who felt constantly judged despite holding the title of Queen Consort. Charles intervened immediately, desperate to prevent palace aides and security staff from overhearing the escalating argument. He sought to frame the dispute as a simple misunderstanding that could be quietly resolved. However, Princess Anne remained completely unfazed. In a calm, measured voice, she reminded Charles that the crown could not afford to have a major public ceremony overshadowed by internal controversy or personal vanity. She emphasized that Camilla's presence under disputed circumstances would invite media scrutiny, whispers of division, and distraction from the military graduates being honored. When Camilla turned to Charles and directly asked if he had sanctioned her removal, the king hesitated. That single moment of hesitation provided a clear answer. Anne's decision stood firm, leaving Camilla isolated and Charles torn between marital devotion and the uncompromising demands of the institution. Here is what makes Princess Anne's authority in this sensitive situation so difficult for anyone to challenge or overturn. Her influence did not stem merely from sharp words exchanged in a quiet palace corridor or a sudden display of royal temperament. It came from a far deeper, structural power within the institution that Camilla appears to have severely underestimated. The palace administration had always known that and possessed a firm and uncompromising disposition. However, this specific moment exposed something far more formidable than personal toughness, and understands the intricate mechanics of the monarchy better than almost anyone alive. She moves within the ancient, rigid architecture of royal ceremony with an effortless confidence that makes any attempt at resistance look reckless, ill-advised, and desperate. When Camilla challenged the guest list, she was not merely arguing with her sister-in-law. She was confronting the entire weight of the historic institution itself. King Charles did not require a senior advisor to explain why his sister's maneuver carried such overwhelming force. Yet he still sat at his desk reading through the official dossier, as if the printed lines might somehow yield a softer interpretation. A senior courtier stood nearby in total silence, watching the monarch's expression shift from initial irritation to a heavy, reluctant realization. Anne's authority had not materialized overnight out of nowhere. It was forged in more than 5 decades of relentless public service, unwavering discipline, and a level of ceremonial mastery that no modern PR team or palace strategist could ever manufacture or replicate. She understands the fundamental nature of royal order because she has lived at its very core, guarded its boundaries fierce, and witnessed firsthand what happens when personal ambition attempts to warp established duty. The sovereign's parade guest list is never just an attendance sheet for a high-profile military function. It is a carefully orchestrated, official declaration of who belongs at the symbolic heart of the sovereign nation. It is a formal arrangement designed to signal to the armed forces, the royal household, and the international community, who remains inside the tight circle of absolute trust. Charles recognized this reality, and that profound understanding made the file before him nearly impossible to countermand. If he were to unilaterally reverse Anne's decision to appease his wife, he would not simply be supporting Camilla. He would be exposing a deep, dangerous fracture at the very core of an institution built entirely on the illusion of stability and unity. A private marital grievance would instantly transform into a disastrous public contradiction. The exact wording of Anne's administrative amendment was far colder than Charles had anticipated. She had not simply crossed out Camilla's name and left an awkward blank space on the protocol sheet. She had completely restructured the surrounding positions, tightened the official order precedents, and realigned the seating hierarchy so that the removal appeared deliberate, elegant, and entirely permanent. That level of meticulous precision unsettled the king far more than an outburst of anger ever could. Anger can be reasoned with, diffused, or calmed over time. Meticulous precision, however, demands a formal response, and Charles realized with growing unease that his sister had already anticipated every possible counterargument before anyone had even dared to raise an objection. Deep within the dossier, Charles located a brief, handwritten private memorandum attached by Anne's office. He paused for several long moments before reaching the sentence that held the true weight of the matter. The parade, and had written with chilling clarity, must proceed without private emotional disputes compromising sovereign representation. Those words contained no overt insults on the surface, yet they landed with the crushing finality of a judicial verdict, and was not launching an open attack on Camilla's character. She was doing something infinitely more lethal to Camilla's standing. She was defining the institutional threat, prioritizing duty above personal sympathy, putting protocol above domestic comfort, and elevating the integrity of the crown above one woman's desperate desire for public validation. Camilla was already feeling the devastating fallout of that decision well before Charles finished reading the final page of the file. She realized she had been completely outmaneuvered long before the day of the ceremony arrived. The Queen Consort had expected a heated dispute, perhaps even a tense family meeting followed by a private compromise or apology. Instead, and had embedded the exclusion directly into the official, unbreakable structure of the state apparatus. When Charles finally closed the folder without uttering a single word, the silence in the room confirmed what everyone secretly knew. The palace machinery had formally prioritized institutional stability over emotional considerations. Once the bureaucratic apparatus accepted Anne's directive, the resulting shockwaves spread quickly through every corner of the royal household. Institutional fallout rarely begins with dramatic shouting or publicized arguments. More often, it manifests quietly through doors that remain firmly shut, telephone calls that go unanswered, and a chair quietly removed from a room where an individual fully expected to sit. For Camilla, the stark reality of her new position became apparent with brutal simplicity. The elaborate preparations for the sovereign's parade continued smoothly without her, and no one made any attempt to pause the momentum or alter the trajectory. When Camilla stepped into the main planning suite, expecting the usual deference, she anticipated that the routine of palace scheduling would naturally bend back in her favor. She expected to see an updated briefing pack bearing her name, a folder containing her official arrival notes, and a designated spot reserved for the Queen Consort, as if the previous conflict had been nothing more than a temporary misunderstanding. Instead, the planning committee had already moved forward. The event schedule was being finalized according to Anne's revised layout. In the world of high royal ceremony, once planning reaches this advanced stage, administrative decisions cease to be treated as proposals and instantly solidify into unalterable facts. Anne's directive had not been worn down by debate or weakened by hesitation. It had been seamlessly integrated into execution. The absolute silence among the planning staff caused Camilla more pain than any direct challenge could have inflicted. Staff members had received strict instructions to proceed with their duties without discussing the change, and that professional discipline created a cold, unyielding environment. No one offered excuses to Camilla because there were no excuses left to make. No one rushed forward to assist her because no individual had been given authorization to intervene. She recognized her complete exclusion before a word was spoken. Her briefing pack was gone. Her schedule was canceled, and the vast machinery of state ceremony was operating as though her presence had never been required. When Camilla inquired of an aide where her briefing materials were located, the brief, agonizing pause before the response provided all the clarity she needed. It was a pause lasting only a few seconds, yet within that brief span of time lay the complete, harsh truth of her reduced standing. The aide did not display disrespect, nor did the aide utter refusal. The aide simply paused long enough for the Queen Consort to realize that Princess Anne's authority extended far beyond a private royal disagreement. It had reached the desks of administrators, the security details, the timing itineraries, and the veteran staff members who were trained above all else never to display emotion. Charles learned shortly thereafter that the final operational briefing had gone to print without any reference to the Queen Consort's office. That specific detail impacted him far more heavily than he cared to admit. A private argument between family members could always be softened with time, and a public relations misstep could be reframed by clever press secretaries. But a finalized operational document that completely bypassed his wife meant that the institution itself had chosen a definitive path. The king felt the walls of protocol closing around him, transforming what he had hoped was a temporary family spat into an unyielding, permanent institutional reality. He had sought additional time to resolve the matter quietly, but the relentless momentum of palace procedure had completely stripped that option away from him. The decisive moment regarding the fate of the ceremony did not unfold in front of senior advisors, press secretaries, or political figures. It occurred in total isolation within a private drawing room, where King Charles and Prince William stood face to face as father and son, confronting a crisis that neither could simplify into basic palace protocol. Princess had executed the administrative removal of Camilla from the official list, but William recognized a far more significant question looming over the monarchy: whether the institution would prioritize protecting personal feelings or safeguarding public trust. Charles looked at his heir with the visible exhaustion of a sovereign carrying two conflicting loyalties that refused to coexist peacefully. He spoke not primarily as a reigning monarch asserting authority, but as a husband seeking a diplomatic resolution. He wanted an honest assessment, yet he was desperately searching for a way to reinstate Camilla without inflicting public humiliation on and or turning the sovereign's parade into a tense, visible royal standoff. Prince William comprehended the surrounding dangers instantly. If the king were to intervene and abruptly reverse his directive, the crown would not convey an image of familial warmth or mercy. It would project a fatal image of internal division, signaling to the nation and the world that ceremonial boundaries could be bent by emotional pressure after a senior royal had already drawn a definitive line. William recognized that his aunt's authority within the ceremonial hierarchy could not be undermined lightly, and had operated strictly within the boundaries of state protocol, and royal order relies entirely on the principle that certain institutional decisions remain firm once executed. The sovereign's parade is not an informal gathering where wounded pride can be soothed with quiet, private apology. It is an unyielding public demonstration of command, unity, and military discipline. Overruling and for marital considerations would send a dangerous signal that domestic discomfort could override historical trust. Charles spoke emotional terms of Camilla's deep distress, explaining that she would not view her absence as formal protocol, but as a deliberate personal rejection. William did not dismiss his father's emotional concern. He knew the Queen Consort would feel the public exclusion keenly, yet his response arrived with the steady weight of a future king. Public duty, William quietly reminded Charles, sometimes requires private pain to remain private. Those words struck with profound force because they were rooted in undeniable reality. William revealed that internal confidence among high-ranking staff members had already aligned with Anne's decisive action. She had acted swiftly before the dispute could inflict lasting damage on the parade itself, before rumors escalated into public embarrassment, and before the monarchy appeared to be managing personal emotions rather than state responsibility. Charles understood the implicit warning. Restoring Camilla would not heal the wound. It would expose it to the world. William left the room without triumph, leaving Charles alone with the silence he had feared most. The king did not overrule the paperwork, nor did he call his sister to demand a compromise. By letting the decision stand, the final trajectory was set. By the following morning, the story could no longer be contained within the velvet walls of the royal residences. What had begun as an administrative revision on a planning document had escaped into the public domain, transforming into a clear narrative a nation could grasp immediately. Princess had taken a firm stand. Camilla was absent, and the monarchy had chosen structural order over emotional repair. News of Camilla's exclusion from the official sovereign's parade guest list spread rapidly across national and international media outlets. Palace press officers attempted to keep their official statements minimal, speaking only of ceremonial adjustments, logistical focus, and refined planning. However, that official restraint could not blunt the impact of the news. The absence itself spoke louder than any carefully worded press release, making the exclusion feel entirely deliberate. Princess received the morning press briefings without any display of victory. She did not celebrate the outcome, nor did she soften her posture. The Princess Royal understood that maintaining order within an institution often carries a personal cost. A major national newspaper featured a striking front-page layout, a prominent photograph of an in full military uniform standing alongside a direct headline announcing the strict line drawn for the parade, accompanied by a smaller, older photograph of Camilla below. The public did not require complex explanations. The visual contrast conveyed the entire story. Outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, Crowds gathered not in vocal protest, but in quiet conversation as people read updates on their mobile devices. The public had begun interpreting the silence as an official verdict, making it virtually impossible for even the king to rewrite the narrative without causing further reputational damage. Charles recognized this truth with painful clarity. He could fight the decision emotionally and risk amplifying the public rupture, or he could accept what the administrative move had already established. Camilla's absence had transcended a private domestic injury to become a matter of public symbolism. Anne's firmness had established a clear standard of institutional discipline, and William's supportive silence had signaled the future direction of the reign. When the immediate media noise quieted, what remained was not a fleeting scandal, but an enduring institutional judgment. In the end, the most potent statement delivered at the Sovereign's parade was not articulated from a podium or released in a formal bulletin. It was defined by the empty space where Queen Camilla had expected to stand. The parade proceeded seamlessly with the revised guest list intact, proving that the institution's structural machinery could withstand intense private pressure and public speculation. Queen Camilla remained away from the venue, her missing presence serving as an unspoken message regarding the boundaries of royal duty. Charles observed the proceedings with the quiet restraint of a monarch who understood that ceremonial trust must be preserved even when personal relationships suffer, and required no further justification. Her actions had spoken with absolute clarity and held firm under extreme pressure. She had demonstrated a fundamental rule of the monarchy. Proximity to the crown is not guaranteed by title or personal expectation, but must be sustained by absolute trust. William's decisive restraint confirmed the future path, choosing discipline over temporary comfort. The Sovereign's parade concluded not with emotional reconciliation, but with an undeniable reality. Within the House of Windsor, a deliberate absence can speak with far greater power than any royal crown.